So to start us off, can you basically just talk about your daughter and then talk about the case following that? Starting off with like what type of person she was, maybe some memories you share, to
Sure.
this day, and then talk about the case.
Okay. Well, we did bury her on her 19th birthday, but from the minute
Okay.
she was born, by the time she was 1 or 1.5, we called her middle name Accident because she was fearless. She would go jumping into pools. She would try to climb on things before she was even able, and she pretty much carried that in all her life. She never seemed to be really afraid of doing things most of the time. She was very creative. She was a dancer for a lot of her life, which I was too. So she sort of came by it naturally. Extremely smart. She started kindergarten early because of her birth date. And so every grade that she was in, she was always a year younger than everyone. And so she still was able to make these great grades. She was this mixture, and I'm prejudiced, but a mixture of beauty and intelligence. She was born with no hair for the first 2 years of her life, and then she started growing these long blonde curls that just cascaded down her face and these really deep brown eyes. And that's one of the pictures, or all the pictures on my car, which we'll talk about later. People tell me those eyes just reach out to them whenever the car drives by, and they make them want to get involved. But she was that way. We lived in Florida in the first 6 years of her life, and we would travel to Kentucky to visit my parents, and she would just stop traffic because she was very small. She never got taller than 5'2", which she blamed me for, but she would just stop traffic. People would think I had permed her hair or something. She just had this beauty. And when we moved to Louisville, in between, before we came out here to Oklahoma, where she was murdered, I was a writer and also going back to school for psychology, but I worked with United Way, and they had every year, and United Way has this mission or whatever, and that year it was about across the population, youth, elders, minorities, and so because she was just so adorable, they wanted to use her. So when we were ever out, her face was on all the buses, because they just started wrapping buses, then on billboards at the airport, because she was part of this profile of 6 or 7 people that represented all the people that United Way, helped. And so, she loved that notoriety. And at the same time, she was extremely sensitive, extremely empathetic. So, that would just, things would just break her heart. And, I can sort of jump forward to our time here in Oklahoma. And in 1995, when she would have been about 10, I'm a psychologist and a first responder, and I was called to the Oklahoma City bombing. And I was the days that I was manning the crisis line, because it was the first time that we ever had responders come in from other states. It was the first really in the country big disaster. And so we were working on the crisis line to talk with all the first responders when they would go home and just be overwhelmed because nobody could believe what they saw. But I brought her with me a couple of times, and it was when they were first starting to put animals. You know how they have them now in front of any place where something's happened, but they had a metal fence that people were just hanging on, and it just broke her little heart. So I didn't bring her up there with me again, but I talked to her about it. But she could be this very mature young thing. She ended up getting a scholarship to my alma mater in Florida, Eckerd College, in chemistry. So that was, she was beautiful, and yet she was a chemistry major. And it was after her freshman year that, because she was a year younger, she came home and moved into these apartments right next to the high school that she had gone to, and that's where she was killed. So that's, it's a brief synopsis. She was very mature but very young. I mean, there were times I can remember a couple of weeks before she was murdered, she was just struggling with some stuff, and she would always lay her head in my lap. And the way I would calm her was take my finger down her nose, and just because it was this little pug nose, and um, I would just say, it's going to be okay. Just when you're overwhelmed, just remind yourself of me. My arms around you, and that was the only way. And I'll probably talk about it later, but that was the only way I was able to say goodbye to her right before we buried her, because they wouldn't let me see her. But that's just a brief synopsis of who she is. So do you want me to go on about the murder, or do you have questions? Or...
Well, before she talks about the case, does anybody have any questions before we go on to that?
I'm actually curious. How often do people actually stop and like ask you about it when they see the car?
All the time. I mean, and that was way back in 2007. That was part of the purpose was, how do I get people to know about this murder? And it really was in traveling nationally. But now that I just moved to Tulsa 6 months ago, I mean, people will come up continually. And if they don't come up, I'll suddenly get an email. Oh, I saw you out by the mall. Or a lot of times I'll go to Panera just to get out of my house and work on some of my psychological reports. And people go, yeah, I saw your car parked in that Panera. So yeah, it's great because it's just a little bit more of getting her story out. But really these days it's more getting to be able to talk about cold cases and the issues with that and DNA issues. So it's great, and the car has changed over the years, but it draws people in, and like I said before, it's that face, these deep brown eyes and those curls, and she's just staring out, almost like she's saying, don't ignore me, because she was that way. She would get in front of you and not let you ignore her.
Was she well liked? Did she have a lot of friends?
Yeah, she was, and at the same time, a lot of times after she was killed, people would say to me, it's interesting because I wasn't part of a popular group, and I thought she was, but she would, she would sit with me at lunch, or she would help me study and stuff. And she had a good group of friends, but she sometimes struggled with self-esteem, so she would feel like her friends didn't like her or something. She
Yeah.
was sort of coming out of that. But even I remember when we drove her to school with her best friend to Florida. And of course, we were in Florida, and we were at a beach the day before. And she was sure that everybody was just hanging around her because they wanted to hang around with her best friend, who was beautiful also. So yeah, she struggled, and she took everything to heart. She was at a concert one time, and and this is where I think it shows her frailty is she got sort of pushed in by the crowd, and I was just, of course, being typical mother, not at the concert but outside of it. And all of a sudden I got a call from my son Brittany's at the in an ambulance, because she had gotten crushed. And what she did when she got scared was, even, and that was when she was 17, to go, mommy, mommy. She just, it's a sort of a PTSD type of thing.
Yeah.
And, the one thing that I couldn't allow myself to think about, but we all do, is that I was told that the way she died, she probably died instantly. But initially, I just had this sort of fear that, those few minutes she was crying, mommy, mommy, and that, I know better than to let that torture me, but, it was who she was.
Yeah. Wow. I am so sorry. That is awful.
Well, I appreciate it, and
Yes.
go on.
No, I said that is. It's terrible. I can't even imagine.
I can't either. I can't either.
It's interesting. I'm just going out to get my cord because I don't want this to go down. Hopefully, there won't be any dogs barking. Um, so it's interesting because, a lot of times people say, oh, I feel so bad. I don't know what to say, or I can't imagine. And I always tell them that by saying, I can't imagine, you really are saying a lot, because in many ways you're saying you can't imagine because you do imagine. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
I always feel bad that people feel bad, but yeah, but it's very true. I mean, it is saying that says a real lot. So,
So take us to that day.
okay. Um, well, it really was also a few days before. Um, so, I had tried to call her on Monday and Tuesday, because she called me actually Monday night on September 27th. And it was, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I thought my sound went down. It was September 27th. She had been at school and with a friend, and she called me because she was having all these nasal issues, and she had gone to this urgent care and sat there for 2 hours and couldn't get any help. So she called me in her typical way of getting, like I said earlier, upset about things. And I said, well, drop your friend off, go home. And I was on call that week. I worked at a female prison. And I said, I'll call you and I'll set up appointment by the end of the week. And so, that was about 9:30 that night, and told her I loved her like I did all the time. And then I tried to get her Tuesday and Wednesday and couldn't get her. And I was living then. I had just moved before she came back to Oklahoma from Florida. I had just moved to Chandler, Oklahoma, because it was 50 miles from the prison instead of me driving 2 hours. And so, I saw no need to go down there when I didn't get her Tuesday or Wednesday, because I knew she had late classes and she doesn't like calling me all the time, and stuff. So Tuesday and Wednesday, I left messages. But Thursday night, which was um, September 30th, I called and left the typical mom message of, Brittany, I know you're okay, but I'm worried. Please, 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 please call me. And that was September 30th. And I was expecting a friend to come in who was visiting me from up north. And there was a big storm out there. And so I figured they were delayed. And so there was a knock on my door. And this is a 100-year-old home, very creaky and everything. And there was a knock on my front door at about 1 a.m. and I open it, and it's like out of this movie, a big storm, rain washing in the door, and this young baby-faced sheriff standing there and going, are you Maggie Zingman? And I said, yes. And he handed me this little piece of paper. He said, you need to call Jeff Felton. Um, uh, your daughter's been murdered. And he was, flipping. I was trying to remember the exact words, but, he was just sort of very uncomfortable. And I said, what, and the typical, no, you've got the wrong person. Are you sure you want me, Maggie Zingman? He said, yes, just call this number. I don't know anything. And
Aw.
so I just, when I know if there's anybody listening who, thank you for people saying, Morgan, for saying you're sorry for my loss. Um, yeah, I just couldn't believe it. I didn't know what to do, and you get so confused. And all I remember was falling backwards, because I had some stairs that I was trying to find somewhere to sit, and I finally ended up at the stairs. And I'm sitting there going, "Who can I call? What do I do?" I need to get to Tulsa, but I don't think I can drive. And so I called my best friend, because I knew it would take her about 45 minutes to do it, and she had watched Brittany grow up, Brittany and Josh, my son. And so I called her and, of course, devastated her. And so she and her husband would drive up. And then I kept thinking, should I call my parents? They were in New York. My sister's in New York. My brother's in California. I don't want to wake them, which is crazy thinking. And I just, finally in my head, obviously I had to call them, and I called them, and, within 6 hours they had gotten back to Tulsa. My friend came up, she and her husband drove down with me, and cell phones were there. They weren't as great as they are now, but her husband was following us in his car, and about almost to the maybe 20 minutes away from the apartment. I told my best friend, I said, I need to do this alone. I don't want you walking in, because what I assumed is I'd be walking in and seeing the body and having to identify it, and all those things. And I just couldn't do that to her. So I said, you need to get out. And she and her husband fought it, but finally they let me go. And I got there, it was still dark, the sun was just starting to rise, and I walk up, because it's 4 apartments on the back, 2 on the floor, 2 in the second story, 4 apartments on the front, and hers was on the back, upstairs on the right. And I look up, and there's all these bright lights, and the doors open and stuff. And I knew she had 2 little cats that we had just recently got. And so I went up the stairs, and I walked into this living room from the front door, and there's just all these lights, and I don't see the cats or anything. And all of a sudden, this police officer comes out and goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm her mother. Can I see her?" And he said, "Oh, she's not here. She's been identified and taken to the ME." And I'm going, "What?" Because all I know, and like many people, if they've been through this, you think it's like CSI, all these stages that you think you're going to be allowed to. And so already I'm having 2 things that down the road, part of my healing is trying to teach police departments not to do this, which, many don't anymore. But, one, how I was notified with one little sheriff. What I found out was that my son was notified in the right way. He was notified in Tulsa with 2 police officers, 2 chaplains, and they only had my old address in Tulsa, and that's why they just sent something up to Chandler. But then for them to take the body and never let me see it or even tell me I could see it, they identified her by her license. And there's so many mistakes down the road, but not there, but about what the ME did down the road that we found out just a few years ago. So, but that's a whole, this story, as people listen to it, I apologize. It's very convoluted. It's very twisted when we get near the last 5 to 8 years. And it's basically badly made for TV movie that nobody would believe the story really happened. It's that crazy and stuff. But
We deal
that
with
was,
a lot of those same type cases, don't we, Amy?
Oh yeah.
They're all like this.
Yeah, but they're not all like from the perspective of what she is. That's what always kind of gets me, because I'm used to talking to the offender. I can ask them a million questions and not feel like I'm going to offend them. Like I don't care, but I'm more like feel like I'm walking on eggshells. Like
no, well, I'll tell you right now, you can't offend me in any way. So
that's
Good.
good.
don't
Okay.
worry, no walking on eggshells here. I mean, just a little aside, as if there's any people who know me who are listening to this. Um, I've covered over 300,000 miles through 48 states on 23 Caravan to Catch a Killer tours. And so that means I have probably talked to about 300 regional reporters. And then God love all you podcasters, because I add that. So I have learned to just, no question is off the table, because I just figure everything is going to help people understand. And, yes, it is different from every person's perspective. But on the flip side of it, I've had great police detective, police chief, head of homicide the first 8 years. Brought me into the case, taught me things, turned over every stone, told me when they couldn't tell me things, and things like that. But and when I'd travel, I'd hear these horror stories. I think, God bless me, I don't have that. Well, now the last 8 years, I'm treated like the enemy. I have a saying now on flyers and everything else: cold cases aren't dead cases. Don't leave us in the cold, because communication is totally shut down. They tell me they don't need to tell me anything. They're actually lying to the media about things. So, in that sense, yes, it's each of our stories, but the commonality is what we use to fight with. If that does that make sense? If other
Mhm.
people are having the same struggle, that's what we use to say to the police or the detectives. No, it's not just me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But
Yes, it absolutely does.
And so, where do you want me?
someone asked if she was an only child.
No, she had a brother who was 15 months older than her, and both of them were going to the junior college. And he actually saw her that night before she left with her friend to go to the urgent care. And so, you know, both of us it devastated, but it really devastated him. And he struggled for a couple of years dealing with it because he was basically the last one to see her, minus the friend that she gave a ride home to. But then he, like many of us who lose people, found a way to do things in honor of her. I mean, he ended up going back to finishing school and getting his bachelor's and getting his master's. And he lives in Florida now and he works with an IT company and he has a lady that I wish they would give me some grandchildren, but that's not happening. But yeah, and both of them had lived a few times with her dad in Florida, but half the reason she came back from Florida was she was there for a year and her dad was in the same town, and she said I hardly saw him. And so she came back because she was a year younger. She was homesick. She wanted to be near me and Josh, but also she had hoped to have some sort of relationship with her father, and she really didn't. So that was he wondered if that was true, but of course I'm too kind. I told him that wasn't true. She didn't come home here because you didn't see her, but it was true. Anyways, but we knew early on we had DNA. I didn't know what all the profiles were, or if I did, I didn't remember that they told me all about them, and that's sort of important later when we talk about the genetic analysis that's been done with it. But they discovered she had been raped or suffocated. The ME on the medical report, which doesn't show any of the swabs, but we know they were done. But he goes, she must have died sometime between 8 or 9 p.m. September 27th, like after I talked to her, and 8 a.m. the next morning by the status of the body. And because her friend said that was the last time they saw her. I mean, there was no body was this temperature. There was none of those things. And we questioned about 3 years ago when we got some new evidence which could change the timeline. We questioned Oklahoma's medical examiner as to why the swabs were not listed in there, why there wasn't any other physical things really listed. I mean, the only thing was listed was that her body had been through rigor mortis and that there was food in her body. And my first reaction when I saw the food that was listed was that she had just had a hamburger. I mean, I know when the body dies, it stops digesting it, but I mean, it's just, there's so many strange things. And the swab's not being listed yet. We know the DNA that's now the second profile is from underneath the nails. So we know that the swabs were taken, but this medical examiner, this is where one of the twists and turns, was fired from Arizona in the early 2000s before he came to Tulsa, was under some sort of federal mandate jurisdiction overseeing because of some problems the Tulsa lab had, and then the Tulsa lab fired him. But this was the medical examiner that had been hired by Tulsa and then fired by Tulsa. So it's just, we don't know if there's some problems. And down the road, I'll talk to you about the new evidence we have, which could totally change the timeline and stuff. So, Yeah, I can go on and talk and talk and talk, but I don't know if you have some specific questions or where you want me to go.
So,
Cause
do they have any idea who did it?
so Jeff Felton, the first detective, probably had over 800 suspects, many of them which he took the first profile for. So we had 5 profiles that were sent up into CODIS, and 5 profiles. You just know it's DNA. They haven't been analyzed who they are, but if they go up in CODIS, they might match somebody, which is the national database. So Jeff, in his 8 years, started uncovering all these suspects: old boyfriends, friends of friends, males in the apartment, male relatives of the apartment, janitors at the apartment, people who worked at the school, people who worked at the college. And he would run DNA against a lot of them, and then it wouldn't match. And he'd just be devastated. When at about year 3, we probably had 200 suspects that DNA wasn't matching. That's when I got the idea about the Caravan, because I started seeing wrapped cars, and I thought, because I tried to get my story to national news, but Brittany has used to have a very boring murder. She was just raped and suffocated in her second-story apartment. I one time had America's Most Wanted producer tell me DNA is not enough of a story. We can't do your story, which was really great. But so that's when I thought I need to get the story national, and somehow I came up with this idea: if I had a wrapped car, that somehow people could see it and maybe find me, and then somehow maybe it was Brittany. I don't know what I believe, but I came up with this. I thought I just have to have something quick they can read, and that's how I came up with Caravan to Catch a Killer. So then we had many suspects, and part of my driving them was, how do these police departments share stories? Well, they get these flyers and stuff. I thought, I'll just take my story to every city and see if we can find some detectives who have similars, because Oklahoma, where we are, we have 35, 40, 20s just below us, 70s just above us, 35 goes through us, 44. So it's called the crossroads of America. So there was a lot of thought. He said, maybe the killer's here, but yeah, maybe he has gone. So we started getting tips from me traveling and stuff. And then you jump forward, and back then, the DNA analysis was not really happening. Back when she was first killed, and this is so important for people to understand, is that DNA was only taken after somebody was convicted. And so people started associating DNA means you're guilty. No, DNA was taken after somebody was convicted with other evidence, and that evidence just clinched it. But when I started on this in 2007, 2008, I started learning about DNA and learning that states were now trying to get it at DNA at arrest, because many rapists and violent people will get arrested numerous times. And there's all these studies out there that talk about, like the Denver study, the Michigan study, the Indiana study, and they all talk about how they finally get these murderers and rapists, and they get their DNA, and what do? They match it backwards over 20 years for all these crimes. And, the only thing DNA does is it identifies the person. Jump forward, our first DNA profile of blood and semen was analyzed by C.C. Moore. We had a phenotype picture made from it. We got a lot of tips from that. But she analyzed, and she made a direct hit. That means it can't be anybody else's DNA. Sometimes with these cases, they'll find a brother or father. No, she identified the person it was. And the detective said he wasn't our killer. And we sort of know now it probably isn't. But Tulsa police refused to announce that she made a direct hit. I know this has to be confusing, but our case was a good example of, if you don't have any other evidence, you can't convict somebody with just DNA. The Supreme Court even said DNA is really just electronic fingerprints, and the other side of it, and maybe in talking with criminals, you might have understand this too, is that there's a lot of false convictions. And so DNA at arrest does two things. One, it gets the killers and the rapists off the streets early, and it also stops these false convictions where people are put away for 20 years until they get the DNA analysis. So I'm sorry, I know I jump all over the place here.
No, no, but that's completely true. I mean, there's a case in Kentucky that's going on right now where they just excluded this guy that's doing 3 life sentences. His DNA was not there, but he's still in prison. And the other two took Alfred pleas and are out of prison. And
Yeah,
yeah,
well, and the crazy thing is, for a long time, the Innocence Project actually thought this, because they also at that point didn't understand DNA, and they thought, no, no, DNA arrest, they're just going to put it on a bunch of people, and it's not. It actually does just the opposite. They try to falsely convict him, and they go, sorry, that DNA is not his. And so in Oklahoma, we actually got the Innocence Project here, and a Senator Pittman to understand that. So it both saves lives and saves lives, if that makes sense. It's just, all these things I thought I never was going to be an expert in. And, there's so many things, but we've had so many suspects, and like I said, the first detective and the first head of homicide and the first police chief all brought me into the fold. They say, oh, we got another suspect. We're going to go run the DNA. They wouldn't necessarily tell me who it was, but we probably did over 800 suspects with that DNA, the blood and semen. So in 2019, when CeCe Moore made a direct hit to that guy, I was in Washington State on one of my tours, drove back to Tulsa in 2 days so that they could announce that she made a hit and that he wasn't our killer. But they ended up, like I said, announcing that yeah, they went out and interrogated him after getting a tip from the picture. Saying you get a tip from the picture is not saying you get a tip from the DNA. And so all these people still think that's valid. But the big thing, and why I bring it up, is because what killed me about him saying that DNA belongs to this guy and he's not our killer, and it killed me the whole drive back from Washington to Oklahoma, was it put us to ground zero, because every single suspect that we compared that DNA to was a suspect again. Does that make sense? I know it's sometimes hard to understand the DNA stuff.
right. No, yeah, it does. It does. Somebody asked, how did they know he wasn't the unaliver after they got the hit?
Yeah. So, and that's a good question. And, when they first told me he wasn't the killer, I said, how? Now, the DNA that they found from the blood and semen was on a sheet, it wasn't inside of her. And it was my daughter's best friend's boyfriend. And my daughter, being the kind young girl she was, let her best friend, who was younger than her, sleep over at her house with her boyfriend. So circumstantially, they had an excuse. I didn't fully believe that initially. I thought how, and from some people were telling me that it probably wasn't a great interrogation. So, but they said they didn't have enough evidence other than the DNA being there that he wasn't our killer. And so the good bad of that is they didn't falsely try to get him. But, I still kept saying, is there still a chance? They say, yes, we'll look and see, find other evidence. But when I started asking them, so are we going to go back if that's not our killer? The other detective used that to compare to everybody, and so aren't we going to go back over all the old suspects? And that detective started just shutting down. He wouldn't tell me. He said, we already went over them. And then after about a year or two of the DNA being analyzed, he retired. over the weekend. He said, I'm retiring, you're gone. I'm still in touch with everybody but him. So this new detective, when I got with him and the deputy chief, I said, I haven't heard about anything I need to know. Can I have a meeting with you all just to figure out, are we still looking at the, are you still there? I don't know why it's
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah,
get
we're
me to
still here.
leave. It's trying to get some, I don't want to leave. Cancel. Okay. Um, okay, there I am. It was, I don't know, I must have touched it or something. But that's when, after they had this DNA wasn't our killer, I started doing more podcasts and complaining then, because now I was getting police that weren't talking with me. They were saying, we're doing whatever we need to do. You don't need to know about it. Oh, I'm sorry, it's my daughter's case. Um, so so again, answering that question, I still had my concerns, and I even talked to some people, of that group, and most everybody said, yeah, probably, he's not. But then even some people close thought maybe he could have been. But I was talking to Paul Holes when he was with Jensen, and they did forget what it's called, but I did a podcast with them, and I told them, I think we have more DNA. I want to send it out. So, and this is still going to the answer of why we think it's not the killer anymore. He gave us $6,000, and I was going to get them to send the more DNA, not knowing what it was, back to Parabon. And the detective, before he retired, said, well, I'll be getting the paperwork. And then it was like 2 months, and he retired, and the paperwork was still not done. And then finally, in January of the year, he retired in August. It was like 6 months later, when I was asking the police chief and the deputy chief and the new detective, they finally got the paperwork done. And instead of sending it off to Parabon, I'm going to sneeze. Sorry. Instead of sending off to Parabon, they sent it off to Othram. You're familiar with Othram?
I don't think so. I don't think
Yes,
I've honestly
yes.
ever heard of them.
Kristen and David Middleman. It's
David.
another.
No, David.
Okay, yeah. So, and they're great people too, but I think because for whatever reason, they wouldn't let Cece Moore talk to media after she made the direct hit. They wouldn't. She was doing a national story in like 5 or 6 cases, and she wanted to do our case just as an example of sometimes the DNA doesn't solve the case. She said that would have been so perfect, to also show both sides of it. But they wouldn't let her talk to media, local or national, or do us on her show. And because she's hired by TPD, Parabon is, she had to follow the contract. Um, so they send it off. What I didn't know, maybe I did, but I don't think I did, is the DNA that they sent off to Othram was the DNA they should have sent off the first time. And that's because it's from underneath the nails.
Oh,
So underneath the nails, what do you think? Defensive,
right.
defensive fighting, and since, Eddie didn't think it was important for me to know which DNA was sending off, and I trusted him to send off the right one the first time, the boyfriends, the blood and semen. I didn't even know about that. So one thing they do when they're sending off these samples, and what they do from all these samples, is they say, do any of these samples match? So we had really 6. We had blood, semen, underneath the nails, and 3 others. The blood and semen were from the same person. That's the boyfriend. But they knew that the nails didn't match him. So when I knew they sent the DNA off from underneath the nails, that made me feel a little bit better, because I knew it didn't match him. Does that make sense? And to the person who asked that, for probably 2 years, I was wondering still, could it be him? And I kept questioning, and they wouldn't say anything to me. But we knew, I knew, when they sent off the DNA underneath the fingernails, I knew it didn't match him. So, does that make sense?
Somebody asked, what was the excuse for the blood being there of the boyfriend's?
Yeah, I just saw that too. And that's where it makes it squirrely because, why was the blood there? It was very minuscule. I mean, so minuscule, I'm not sure how they found it. So the second detective, who, pretty much think he's an idiot if you're listening, Eddie, said, well, it could have been from a bloody nose. And I said, I think somebody would remember, if they had a bloody nose. And so, but that is why I questioned it for 2 years. I said, how do you know? Have you gone back? Did you find one big question that I asked about the sheet, because that's where the semen was found, and that was found by Jeff because initially they didn't find it on the sheet, and he said, I'm going to go back over all the evidence and reanalyze it, and that's when they found the semen on the sheet. They had already had the fingernails, but they didn't have the ability to analyze it back when Jeff was a detective. So he sent the nails off to CODIS. He sent all these profiles off to CODIS. With the genetic analysis now, it's a whole different ball game because you can at least start to find out what culture it is. So, like the blood and semen from the boyfriend, before we found out who he was with the direct match, it was white, Caucasian, Eastern European. And like I said, we know that the underneath the nails is not him, and it probably is not his makeup either, but we know it's not him. But, I still don't, I've, the other thing I was going to say is that, I immediately, when he said it's his, but it's not the killer, I said, did you get the girlfriend's, my daughter's best friend's, was her DNA on the sheet? Because it should have been, and he told me he was going to do it. I don't know if they ever did it or if they confirmed it because I don't believe I need to know anything anymore. And for some reason, for 8 years, I never shared anything I was told. And then suddenly I'm treated like I would share everything because I felt it important when CeCe Moore made a direct hit. I felt it important to say that she identified the owner of that DNA, because if I didn't, if I said it the way Tulsa police said it, then everybody thinks that picture is valid because that picture was made from him and it says white, Caucasian, Eastern European. And so if they say they get a tip from a picture, doesn't that make you think that that picture is still valid?
I would think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and somebody just said, yeah, if maybe there isn't one. And that's the thing is, that's why there could have been two, but I can tell you the one thing I know, there's some explanation for the sheet, and I'm still never going to say it's 100% till we have, and if we have our killer. But of course, I do follow the person, so I know who that person is. I mean,
I was
obviously.
going to say, where is this person? Have you ever talked to him?
Yeah. I've talked to him because sometimes I couldn't find Brittany's best friend, and he would contact her for me because for years after Brittany was killed, it was her best friend. She had grown up. Her dad was a police officer, and her dad almost came on that call to identify her, and it got called away at the last minute. So there were all these things. Was her dad, standing up for him when he shouldn't have? But what I can say is the DNA underneath the nails has to be her killer. Whether we can identify it or not is a whole nother question. Because if it's of certain populations, not his, it's very hard because not all populations are in these. A lot of people now, you can opt in to use 23andMe, you can opt in to use a lot of these different things, but certain populations are not using them a lot. And so it's getting harder and harder because you start with a big tree. It could be anybody in the world. And then as you narrow down the DNA, and it takes a long time, but as you narrow down certain factors in it, then you can say, like they did with him, oh, it's probably Eastern European. It's probably not North African. It's possibly, Hispanic, which his wasn't. But these other DNA samples probably have different cultures than his. And so if we get, because they won't tell me, again, Othram can't tell me anything. They have to abide by what Tulsa police is saying. And at one point, Othram said, why don't you talk to the old detective and see if he can give us some ideas about some of the old suspects? Because I still am in communication with him. And here's where it starts getting more squirrely. Tulsa police told the caseworker on our DNA analysis that he could not talk to the old detectives. He could not talk to the old head of homicide. He could only talk to the current detective. Does that make any sense?
Why?
Huh?
Why?
Why? Yeah, why? 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 Why have I fought for 5 years for the sheriff was my detective for 1 year in between the first and second detective. He's now head sheriff. He's been head sheriff for about 8-9 years. He has a cold case task force made up of retired TPD, Tulsa Police, made up of FBI, DEA, explosive. It's made up of all these people. They have been offering since 2020 to provide assistance on the case. And they have refused. At one point, they were working with us, and then they stopped. And just recently, I did a story on Christmas Day because I finally moved to Tulsa, and I'm going to be in their face every day. And I did a story. I said, "Why? What would it hurt to allow cold case help that I've been trying to get you all to use for the last 5 years?" And the head of homicide, Lieutenant Watkins, said, "Oh," and he said this to the media, and I was told that he said this to the media before the story went out. He said, "Oh, we've never been contacted by anybody for, I don't know what she's talking about." And then God love, I don't know if you know Cheryl McCullum, Mac.
I do. Yeah. You do too. Don't you guys?
I know of her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, Mac
Yeah.
Mac is unbelievable. That she's helped me in so many ways. But Mac is CID, 30 years. She's over in Atlanta. She has promoted my case at CrimeCon. Anything. Well, Mac got on, and because I had her talk to the reporter, and I said, "Please report what she's saying." And so she got on our story and said, "That's not true. I have been attempting to provide assistance since 2022." And they keep doing this. I get it like a story with people, and they'll say all these things. Like they did one story where they told the national reporter, and I get very few of them, but they said, "Oh, we work hand in hand with Dr. Zingman all the time." No, they don't. I call them, they don't return my calls. So I text the detective and I email them. I was told 3 years ago I email them too much, I call too much. That's why they don't respond. So I stopped doing that. I went and, like a abused spouse, I only wrote them every 4 or 5 weeks. They have not responded to anything I've written since August, including me thanking them for speaking up on the People article. Um, you know, so I know I'm trying to answer some of these questions. I'm also um, trying, but I know I go all over. I'm probably confusing people a lot. Yes, somebody asked if the DNA would still be on the sheets. Yeah, DNA can be around for a long time. And my daughter was 18. We buried her on her 19th birthday. She did not wash the sheets. I know that's a little bit gross, but but the DNA was still on the sheets. But they thought it was urine. Brittany was not killed in her bed, or she was, but she might have been, but she was found on the floor in the opposite direction of her bed. That's another thing. I think all of this stuff I've learned to never say never. But again, if somebody has DNA underneath their nails, that's a defensive DNA. That sounds like Brittany, that you would be fighting, because she was little, but she was powerful and stuff. But I want to also just bring this up real quickly because it gets into more of these crazy things. Is in 2023, my ex-husband from 1989, her father wrote me on January 2022 actually, and said, "Don't be angry at me, but I'm going to send you something. I'm going to show you a picture of it." And what it was an envelope. And he told me he got the envelope 10 days after Brittany died. So he had come up here for the funeral, went back home. This envelope had what we call a machine-made stamp, meaning when you buy the stamp, you put your envelope underneath the machine. It's from a kiosk and it stamps it. The date of that stamp was September 29th. If people remember, I said she was killed, the ME said sometime between September 27th and September 28th. And that's
Oh,
what
wow.
they did. Yeah. And the machine made stamp, it's not like you put a stamp on and then something cancels it. The whole stamp is designed, and I can post a picture at some point, So when that came out, I took a day or two to give it to the detectives, and they had three detectives, the detective, the head of homicide, and another officer come to the hotel, because I was staying in a hotel and I was living in Lawton. But they told me, "Oh, it's not going to do anything," and stuff. And I said, "Well, that's why I want to do a media story. I want to see if maybe somebody had it, maybe they mailed it, for her. And, if I put it out in the media, then that'll help us know if maybe somebody just mailed it for her." And so they were able to put it into the kiosk. And that head of homicide, Lieutenant Watkins, who's still there, said to me, "Oh, nobody's going to remember mailing something 19 years ago." And I looked him straight in the eye, because he's such an paternalistic, really, I could use certain words, but I'll just say pejorative, mean. But I looked him in the eye and I said, "If I mailed something for somebody and 2 days later I heard she was murdered, I sure as hell remember it." And he goes, "Well." And I said, "Well, but I just think it's important." And so I gave it to him, and he goes, "Well, it's probably not going to do anything." I said, "Well, fine. Then if it's not going to do anything, there's no problem me going to the media." They've had it since, I wish I could remember. I think it's 2023, but they've had it for, no, actually, it'll be 2 years now. They've had it for almost 2 years or a year and a half. They've never called my ex about it, never asked him questions about it. And he had it for 17 years. And what he said to me was, every year she sent him a card that sometimes she wanted to send to her grandfather, and she never remembered the address, so she was sending it to him. And he said, "I didn't think anything about it, and it was the only thing I had left of her. And so, I just kept it all these years. And then we moved, and I found it in the box, and he suddenly found Christ or something like that, and he just wanted to make amends." And so he had it for that long. But they've never talked to him. They told me a year and a half ago that it was sent off to the FBI. They've never had anything. And if you look at that People article, where the writer didn't write any of my complaints about them, but she did write what they said nice about me, he said, "Yeah, that envelope is a bit strange." But they're not communicating with me. I asked them, any more ideas in the envelope? Where are we with the DNA? There's so many things. Like I said at the beginning, the medical examiners, this case just needs to be taken away from them, or the head sheriff's group needs to take it. After this many years, what is the harm of a cold case? When I travel every single police department I talk to goes, God, we'd love to have some cold case help. Tulsa is the second largest city in Oklahoma. They have one cold case detective, and then
Oh, wow.
they tell me, well, he's really overworked. He has all the cold cases, and then we have to pull him into regular cases. So I turn it right back to them. I say, well, then wouldn't it really be helpful to have the Sheriff's Task Force or Cheryl McComb's Cold Case Investigative Research Institute? Wouldn't it help, you know, for them to take that weight off your shoulder? They won't. So, have they done something wrong? I don't know. But boy, they make it squirrely. And so then it does ask you, what about the evidence? Was there a problem with the evidence that they're trying to hide? Where people are talking about some things are squirrely. But yeah, and somebody was just saying they do this to a lot of families. That's my purpose now. If anybody's listening and they have a cold case and their um, department is doing some of the same things. I come from two sides. I come from the great, great, great police department the first 8 years, and I come from the police department from hell. And I may never change any of my things, but because I'm a fighter, as most people know, I will fight for this for everybody. I may not change it for me, but I want to become a voice for families because most aren't crazy like me and drive all across the country now at 70 years old by yourself.
I love that for you, though. I honestly
I love
do.
it for you too. I love it. It actually sounds fun.
Yeah, and it sounds like, if nothing else, I have come across families, over the years where they have kind of like just become kind of complacent that nothing's ever going to move. And I feel like, they think there's no hope, and so they just kind of give up, and I hate
Yeah.
seeing that. And
I
but I
know.
understand it. And I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like maybe you might give so many people hope, like, you know what, I'm going
I
to jump back
hope
in and start
so.
doing this.
I hope so because that's what keeps me going. I just turned 70. I hope to have another 20 years. My dad lived till 96, so I may never solve this. But boy, if in Brittany's name, it's why I pushed to get DNA at arrest laws. It's why now one thing that many of us are working on, and people can contact me if they've already done it in their state, Homicide Survivor Rights Act. There are too many people going through this. I have some friends in Tennessee. They've been fighting for that. I'm working with the lawmaker, not this year because he just got bowled over by a whole bunch of things. But I want to be the voice for that change. And we need to do it, on a national level. But if nothing else, the more we have voices, because I think somebody said it way early on, and then I wanted to answer something else somebody said, but um, is that now my brain just went voice now. Oh yeah, I know. When our police departments go, because what our deputy chief, who's now angering everybody, he's already got officers complaining about him, but he's the one that told me that I need to just go home. He introduced me to a bunch of his staff when I was asking for an update. He goes, "So, Dr. Zingman, you have a problem with our work in the case? The floor is yours." And I was just saying, all I need is update. But I digress. The point is that each department who does things like this says, "Oh, it's just that family." I was told I'm the only Tulsa family that gives them problems. And I already have 6 Tulsa families who that's not true. And I'm meeting with the mayor and the deputy commissioner next week on that. But nationally, we need that too, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in small towns and big towns who are being told that they are the only ones and that they just don't understand. Oh, you don't understand police work. I do because I was taught by the best. Yeah.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
but can I just answer one thing real quickly? Gianna said it seems unlikely to me that they slept together in a bed the one night they had to use their bed. Well, yeah, except they came over every a couple of weekends, and what her best friend told me later on, her best friend at one point early on said, I don't know, maybe he could have, because she just wasn't sure. But the thing is that Kara was young. Like I said, her dad was a police officer, and she couldn't sleep with him at her house. So Brittany being 18 and Kara being 17, that's why they slept there. And she said that Brittany would just go, no, no, I'll sleep out on my couch. And they even talked about that night that they were there, that Brittany was asleep on the couch when they left, and stuff. So, I still think it could be him. It's fishy, but the thing that's making me think it's not him is I know the DNA underneath the nails is not him, because they made sure, like I said at the beginning, right after the crime, to see what of this DNA matches to each other. And if it matches, like the blood and semen, it was the same owner. The nails was not the same person. Well, and I love Gianna. Any thought, what people, I always tell them, no thought is stupid, no tip is silly. Any thought, it just means you're thinking about it. So even if I say, well, we've thought about it, or I go, well, no, one, it gets me thinking more. And two, it just, it means people are thinking about it. So I don't care if I hear a tip 10 times, 20 times, it means people are thinking of it. And that's the benefit of the car, is that, I'm going to keep people thinking of it till I die, I guess.
So here's a question for you. What is
Mhm.
something that you need, like, what do you need help with, in terms of, like, is there any kind of service that might need to be done, any kind of PI, or like what could help you potentially get you some closure? Because
And
I don't think the cops are going to do it.
yeah, no, you think?
Just
I'm
saying.
sorry. I get so sarcastic sometimes. That's how I survive. Sarcasm, crying, pain, and joy, and getting back. I have such fun thinking my ways to get back at them. Like when Cheryl McCollum talked in that media, I just was going, yeah, let's have because I know I made them. They were getting away with saying things that weren't true. Anyways, what I really need, and I don't know how to stress this anymore, and I had hoped, because I met the people, reporter at CrimeCon in Nashville last year, and somehow we reconnected and stuff. What I really, 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 really need from the depth of my heart is I need some national investigative news. Now, I do have some investigative reporters behind, but Lori Fulbright is my CBS reporter. She's been with them 30 years, with me 20, since day one of Brittany's murder. She and I have shook the tree a little bit. Local news has to maintain a relationship with the police department to a certain level. And Laurie
Right.
has really pushed that boundary. The only people that are going to shake the news, I mean, it's going to shake TPD, is national news. So if anybody has, and I'm talking about ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, I mean, I know it seems that this is just one of millions, and I understand that. But this, with so many twists and turns, this, with me even saying in my emails, just tell me you received this, because I send them tips. I don't even get that. This chief is so punitive, so retaliatory. It's like, it's retaliation. It's whistleblower retaliation. And I'm not even raising that much stink, but maybe there's nothing going on. But with the envelope, with the not communicating with me, with
Right.
lying to media, I need that. I mean, I'll take any type of help, podcast, anything. But that's what I can't seem to get. Like I said, America's Most Wanted years ago told us, that there wasn't enough DNA. Um, Unsolved Mysteries Netflix podcast did our story, but it wasn't done on its show on Netflix. There's a lot of people who don't want to do stories with Tulsa police because they put so many restrictions on them. But that's what I need. I need somebody to shake it up. PIs, they're going to be, everything's going to be redacted what they try to get. That's the problem. You know, you know, and the problem too is that the people on the sheriff's cold case task force, Sheriff Vic Regulato, he and Mike Huff, who used to be head of homicide, and Dave Walker, they're all ex-TPD. They all have had my back, especially since 2020 when the Tulsa police started shutting down on me, and I wouldn't have survived without them. But they all know the case, and they have these ideas, and yet they can't find out. Have they re-looked at these people? We had a security guard who pretended that he was part of the case that Jeff looked at. Back then, he compared the DNA, and he didn't match. But see, that's where, if the DNA, that DNA really isn't our killer, we need to pull that suspect in again. Because if that DNA is really not our killer, if the boyfriend's DNA is really not our killer, all those suspects become suspects again because invalid DNA was used to rule them out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And Gianna, I wanted to point out that she was talking about Cheryl McCollum. That's actually Nancy Grace's best friend.
Yep. And, Cheryl found me doing a caravan through Atlanta, got me a story with Nancy Grace. Then for a couple of years, they tried to do CrimeCon. Then when CrimeCon was in Orlando, Cheryl did my story as a ride along, which I didn't even understand what that was till it was a Friday night at CrimeCon, and they were doing my story on stage. And the interesting thing is when I travel, I leave cards and flyers in a rest stop, and somebody coming from Mississippi to Orlando found one of my flyers in a rest stop that I had left there. So, and Cheryl McCollum, helps me all the time. Case files, if people want to hear another good story that was done years and years ago, I still get tips from Case Files. They're from Australia, and they did my story at the Nashville Crime Con. And by the way, if anybody goes to this, I just found out I was gifted a table for there this year in Denver. So, hey, I know Lee Egan. Do you know Lee? Do you all
Yeah,
know Lee?
she worked on the Heather Turner case over here in Paulding County with
Yeah.
Crime Online.
Yeah, she has been great. She has been a gift to me many times. You know that, Lee, don't you? I just saw her name on there. So, um, but yeah, I mean, anything that anybody thinks of is a gift. But the big gift, because I am 70 and because I'm not sure, like I was supposed to travel and there was ice and snow in Tennessee, and then there was ice and snow in Dallas, and I said I'm too old to travel in that, so I didn't travel. This winter, so I'm hoping to travel maybe April, and definitely I'm going to be doing a caravan out to your area in all of August because CrimeCon is in Denver, September 5th through 7th. So I'm going to do a caravan to the Northwest down through California and back to Denver in August. So
That's cool. Amy and I are going, right, Amy? You won't forget.
What do you mean I won't forget?
are you all going to have a table at CrimeCon?
I applied. I need to
Oh,
email
that's
them to
right. You
follow
told me
up,
that.
but we'll see. I mean, if I don't get a table, we're gonna go regardless because there's a lot of people I want to meet, like Dr. Ramsland. Hopefully, Dr. Burgess is there, Dr. Lee, and
Oh yeah, they're all there. But beware. It's sometimes like in Orlando is odd. It was so crowded there. They had guards for a lot of the well-known people. I mean, it was bizarre. In Nashville, they didn't, yeah, which was good. But there's always lines to all those people. But your best bet is like what Exhibitors Row and Podcast Row because that's where all of us are. But that's where I'm not famous, but I was sitting next to Gabby Patento's family, and stuff And it's just exposure. And I'm hoping, like in Orlando, where it was, there was like this big glass wall where people walked past to go to different rooms and stuff. And so I got to park my car right out in front of that, so everybody was seeing the car and stuff. In Nashville I was in a garage, but that's okay. I'm getting a table, so, and I've offered to present, but I don't know. I'm not famous, so I probably won't be able to, but so
Good night, Jen.
bye.
Hey, Peggy.
So but I mean, there's so much here, and anybody who wants to, I think you all put my Facebook page on here too, didn't you?
Me?
Well, I don't think you can't really post much. Like the description I put on there, like was maybe like 7 words, and it was like maximum
Yeah.
amount of
Well,
characters.
I think in the comments I um, wrote it, but basically it's mom.missing.Brittany. So people come there. I mean, I'm coming to TikTok more now, but I post a lot of things on Facebook. Also, if anybody wants to contact me through messages here, or really, you can message me on Facebook or you can email me. I'm a therapist and I'm a poet. So my email is therapoet@aol.com.
Hey,
So
what kind of therapy? You're the one that does trauma therapy, right?
yeah.
Okay,
I,
so one of the reason I'm asking is because I have I'm in a nonprofit with Selwyn Jones, which is the uncle to the late George Floyd.
yes.
And one of the things that we're doing is we're starting to put together our programs that we're going to do because we just got our 501(c)(3). And
Oh, good for you.
one of the things that we want to start offering is trauma counseling. And so I would love to talk to you about the best way for us to kind of be able to do that for people.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and I'd love to do that. And I work with veterans. I do assessments and I counsel them, but I do a lot of pro bono stuff because, that's what I do. But yeah, I was a trauma survivor my own self from assault and all those things, for my first 34 years of my life. But it was people who treated me when I didn't think I could get better that made me then want to go into the field. But they also said, you got to be fully healed or you'll last maybe 5 years in the field. And now I've got 37 years. So, I had to
Good
fine
for
tune
you.
stuff. But yeah, I mean, I love it. And I'm a first responder. I love doing that. I love my combat vets, homicide, but, unfortunately, you did hear, didn't you, that somebody has put in for trying to get a pardon?
Mm-mm.
That's what I just read for his killer.
Oh, Derek Chauvin.
Yeah,
He's
I
gross.
just read somewhere about that. I
That
hope
he's
it's
trying to what?
trying to get a pardon.
Oh yeah, that's
I'm sorry, I'm going to be
the crazy
political.
thing is I can see it
The
too.
person who is pardoning all the people who have done violence. But sorry, I had to say that.
Right, right. Yeah, there was one guy that was pardoned or granted clemency, whatever it's called. I forget what it's called. He was doing like a 37-year sentence, and he was the leader of the Proud Boys or something
Oh
like that.
yeah,
He had
yeah,
like
yeah. And now
conspiracy
he's
and
threatening
something else
people.
like that.
But they also pardoned, and very interesting. They pardoned the people who attacked and injured and killed some of the police officers. And from that, for some reason, FOP initially supported that person. But now the Federation of Police, which is, the national union for it, said we no longer support the current residents because he had, and they destroyed. They said no longer are the mints honoring those Washington police, or they're not going to be in the mint. I mean, they're kicking out. I mean, I have veterans calling me every day now because they're worried about their services, and some of them have been working 20 years in the VA, and they're getting they're losing their job. It's just sad, but sorry. Like I said, I'm a fighter. I just.
Right, right. Um,
Oh no, that's who said that? Somebody, Tiny Mama.
Tiny mama.
Oh no, 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 no! Don't say that. I mean, feel free. Like I said, contact them if you don't know how to contact me, but contact me on mom.missing.brittany. And the one thing Brittany wouldn't want you to do is lose sleep. Like, well, I always say, Brittany, I grieve every day, of course. I mean, it's healthy, but I also live life to the fullest because I think Brittany would come back and haunt me if I didn't. And she would be doing all of this. She was going to be making cancer medication. She was a fighter. Like I said, she was empathetic. So, Tiny Mama, please just take care of yourself. Oh, she's sweet. Well,
She is.
I hope all these people will follow me here. But like I said, I do a lot on Facebook. My lives, because I'm not famous enough to do a live on TikTok. I guess I don't get enough likes or something, but I do lives on Facebook. I'll start talking about that. But again, mom.missing.brittany, Brittany. Come visit me there. I guess I could even write that in here in the comments, probably, but I don't know how. It's so small.
It
Um,
is.
and I have big fingers, sort of. But I just really appreciate everybody on here. I mean, yeah, and again, no question is off the table. And Tiny Mama said she'll sleep good. I know. Well, and you know that too. Sometimes I think Brittany was beautiful. She would stop traffic, and she was very intelligent, and she would have had a PhD and 3 kids by now. Because she was boy crazy. But um, she would have changed the world. But I can tell you that that's the comment that I get every time I get out on the road, that seeing her face from my car, that she's changing people's worlds. And that just means that's why I keep on, because if nothing else, it makes people think about, maybe loving their children more, or maybe pushing for laws. Many of us in this family that we didn't choose, we do stuff in honor of them because I'm a mom. I want everybody to know Brittany. And so that's how I do it. I mean, I'm close to, at least 600,000 people knowing her just from being on the road all the time. So how many moms get to say that? I mean, I take her back in a second, but gifts like what you all are doing, gifts like all the people on here, you know, I have to say, if I had to have this path, boy, the gifts that I've had on here are unbelievable.
That's good. That's amazing.
You all are amazing that you all are doing this. I really, really appreciate this.
Oh, there's so many cool things to come. I'm so excited about everything that this year is going to bring.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I just think, part of it is, working on changing laws. Part of it is, I just want to, unfortunately, in Oklahoma, if you're native, you can have OSBI take the case, or if it's a federal case, in the county takes the case. Unfortunately, we have a city case. So it's like, I can't get the FBI to look at it. I can't get OSBI to look at it, and there's stacks. And I just talked to somebody who was a detective at the same time, and he had the same idea. He said, Othram should be talking and getting hold of Jeff's old case file. He said, I don't understand why Tulsa police are not allowing it. The FBI agent, Sam, who's now on the sheriff's task force, he's saying, it doesn't make sense. Why are they lying? Why won't they let us look at it makes them look criminal even if they aren't. So
Um,
but I
well, thank you
thank
so
you
much for
all.
sharing.
Well, thank you all so much for asking me.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm definitely looking forward to meeting you at CrimeCon this
Yeah,
year.
you better. I mean, I'm more identifiable because you see my picture, you see my car. My car's pictures will be all over my table, so you may have to seek me out
Okay, for
Okay.
sure.
and stuff. And then too, where are you all in California?
I'm in
I'm in
Washington
Georgia.
State.
Oh, okay. What? Oh, Washington State. Well, as long as there's no snow in the mountains, I'm planning to do a Wyoming, Montana, maybe Idaho, Washington State, Oregon, California. If I can get that in about 4 or 5 weeks before Denver, and then maybe just come across from Oakland or San Francisco because that's where my brother lives. But I may be coming through your state, so.
Well, yeah, I don't think there'll be any snow then here at least, so you don't have to worry about that with Washington, like because it's from like basically November to like March, I think.
Yeah, I know. Once I made the mistake of being in Idaho mountains in October, and there was some just dusting. I was just saying, "Get me down this mountain before it starts."
Yeah,
you
I
know.
went to visit a serial unaliver a few days before Christmas, like 10 years ago in Walla Walla, and I was so scared because I rented a car and I didn't get chains or anything, and I barely made it, and I made it back in Christmas for Christmas in time, and that was scary.
Well, thank you guys so 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 much. I mean, you really made my day, my evening, my week, my month, my year. So,
Awesome.
Well,
Well,
thank you again.
thank you, and we'll definitely stay in touch. And it was good talking with you, and
yeah,
I look forward to meeting you in person.
same here.
Andrew,
And
don't
if
hang up yet.
yeah, and if anybody has any questions, just send them my way.
We will.
Okay, thanks, guys. I really
You're welcome.
appreciate it. You have a place in my heart.
All right. Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.